let's really dive into specifically on gut health and its relationship to mental health.
Yeah, 90% of your serotonin is created in your stomach, and that serotonin is then transported to the brain. If your plate looks like a rainbow, you're on the right track. And meditation, I would say if you haven't tried it, try it. It will change your brain, literally. Okay, well, all right, that's a challenge. Coffee may extend your life.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't dispute that. It was in the Journal of Alzheimer's. There's a mention on
right,
coffee,
yeah.
caffeine. Welcome to the Joint Dynamics podcast. My name's Andrew Cox. I'm one of the owners and directors of a business here in Hong Kong called Joint Dynamics, and I'm also the curator and the host of the Joint Dynamics podcast. Let me start today with a question. Have you heard of gut health? Have you heard of the microbiome? Have you heard of probiotics, or are you using probiotics? Are you a little confused with probiotics? And are you aware of this term, the gut-brain axis? And then what's the relationship with the gut, the health of the gut, in relationship to mental health? Well, today's guest on the Joint Dynamics podcast is Philip Watkins. So Philip is a naturopath with over 10 years of clinical experience in the field of naturopathy, homeopathy and functional medicine. And he has treated a wide range of health conditions in both children and adults. Philip graduated from the Australian College of Natural Medicine, and prior to joining IMI here in Hong Kong, he ran a successful business clinical practice in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome back to the Joint Dynamics podcast. Philip, how are you today, mate?
I'm back. Thank you. I'm very, very well. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you back, mate. We just discussed that this is the third time we've hung out in this context.
It is, and our first video too.
Oh, and big shout out to Monday Studios with Wilson here. Thank you very much for
Thanks for having
allowing us to go live here. And also a shout out to Mu Vitality, another sponsor of the Joint Dynamics podcast. Get some functional mushrooms into your people. They're amazing.
Oh,
hello, mate. Philip, okay. I alluded towards the topic of gut health, the microbiome, probiotics. Sometimes I hear conflicting stories. Have there been enough research done on humans to prove their efficacy? There's so many different strains of quote unquote good bacteria that we hear about. And where we'd really like to land in this conversation is the relationship of the gut to mental health. With that framing the conversation, I'll throw over to you to introduce us to the topic.
So this all really started from people with IBS coming to my clinic back in Melbourne even, and not really getting enough answers for what was going on in totality for their irritable bowel syndrome symptoms. So generally things like bloating and gas and, that kind of classic picture of getting symptoms after eating. The visit to the modern medical practice at the time was saying, and obviously this is a while back, was saying, it might all be in your head, literally. And I actually had a patient who said that was their experience. And obviously this is not whitewashing everyone's experience, but I think to preface how all of this came around, over time now, and probably over the last maybe 5 to 10 years, but I would say 5 more predominantly, the functional gastrointestinal disorders, which was the kind of category that you would have IBS and chronic dyspepsia, so indigestion and some of these other conditions, have now been reclassified as disorders of the gut-brain interaction. So what that does is it brings in, I guess, the holism from some of the traditional medicine models, in the sense that what happens in Vegas doesn't stay in Vegas, in that sense where we often felt like if it was a gastrointestinal problem, it was, that's where it stayed. You would see a specialist for that. To be fair, like the specialists have answers, but there are some interesting statistics on this where 84% of patients with IBS also have a depressive disorder or some form of anxiety.
84%?
Yeah.
Wow, that's high.
That's a lot. And then moving through that, you would have 45% of patients with anxiety, and 30% or 1/3 of people with a depressive disorder would move on to develop some form of IBS or some form of gastrointestinal issue, if you like, as well. So with that said, now my clinical practice has moved into, out of necessity, having to try and bring in the interaction between the brain and the gut in order to just to basically help people. So from there, the fortunately, PubMed and all the researchers out there have been able to draw out the connections that we kind of already knew were there. So, for example, when you become anxious, you lose your appetite. We've had these kind of gut feelings, so to speak, for
The
a
pun's
very,
appropriate.
but I think this is the interesting thing, right? All of these cliches and these kind of, things that we've said, gut wrenching and all of these things that are actually largely describing the connection between these two systems. And as I said, there's been, I'm not sure if you ever watched it's probably the hippies documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know? 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. I'm aging myself and probably, some people have just turned off now. But the idea is that one of the, Candace Pert in that documentary, she was responsible for discovering the opioid receptor. And an amazing story if you're ever interested, because obviously you see these people as talking heads in these documentaries, you don't really understand the background. But to make a point on that, she created psychoneuroimmunology. So she was one of the first people in my history of clinical practice who had kind of said, hey, why don't we bring all of these kind of independent areas together and start to look at the interaction between the two and the connections between the two as potential bridges to help people better.
I remember that Molecules of Emotion.
There you go. Yeah.
Do you remember
Molecules of Emotion,
that page where it was the body's response to opioids and then the body's response to sugar? That was, do you remember? And you're like, hang on, if you close your eyes and you read each one out, you're like, hang on, which one's sugar? Which one's the response to opioids? Like, it was really remarkable. A great graphic to realise,
So for me then, over the last, probably, as I said, over the last 5 years, I've always had an interest in mental health, and partly, just through the people I seem to have attracted in my early years of practice. But I think I originally started off in a psychiatric outpatient centre, my first ever practice out of Melbourne. I remember
you telling me that.
And I often saw people who wouldn't really know where to start. And the origin of Good Mood Flat Tummy and the work that I'm doing with that is more around trying to help people to deconstruct what's going on, because I think you can be bloated, but then you're distracted by feeling bloated, for example, but then you can be anxious when the bloating goes away and you're just treading water. So the idea is that fortunately the literature and the way we're defining these conditions now is helping to better understand common conditions like IBS, where I think now 40% of the world is going to have some form of gastrointestinal disorder at some stage.
Again, that's stark, isn't it?
It is, and I think also we're overly stimulated. And obviously this is a huge conversation around, it's a bit of a rabbit hole.
Let's take on the big topics, mate, me and you, right now.
But the idea is that, to speak even just basically about a gut feeling or the way, anxiety would change your digestion, even just, a sense of heightened vigilance, if we like. So let's just leave stress alone, because I think, there's non-adaptive stress and adaptive stress, and that's one thing. But the idea is that just being in a state of hyperattention or, having to attend to, 12 different things a day, which is the modern world. And then, going on a social media platform and then meeting 1,000 people that you don't know and catching up with their lives, the idea of the heightened element that plays on your nervous system actually radiates down through the vagal tree and hits your digestion. And it actually tells the digestion that it's not time to eat because you're doing something. And I've always used a quite extreme example or a way of describing that to some of my more hypervigilant people, where you're not going to stop for a sandwich when someone's chasing you for a knife.
Yeah, when you're in that fight or flight response,
that's right.
Digestion doesn't really come up, does it?
That's
it actually gets down-regulated.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's actually science around early development and the gut and the brain, where microbes will, in around about 0 to 3, and I've got a 4-year-old now, so you can imagine the first 3 years of my daughter's life, poor thing is just an extremely paranoid father.
Your daughter's nickname is Petri dish. Is that right, Phil?
Just the smoothie queen. It's like, this is green, but don't worry about it. I've just been like smoothing up everything. The poor thing.
20 different types of food everywhere.
Just it really is though where it all starts.
Yeah.
The microbes in early life do actually start to develop the immune system within the brain, and also there are some preliminary studies now that look towards obviously kids as they grow up now, and they're able to follow them over time and start to develop ideas around how the gut in those early years are actually affecting the brain in adult life.
Okay, all right. You know what I think we should do right now in the structure of my mind and the way this conversation goes? Let's create like a brackets, because I think we need to just simplify terminology, and then we'll come back to, because what a great way to frame this conversation. Because as a baby, just say ideally there's a vaginal birth. There's other reasons why people have a C-section, but as a baby, you're a blank slate as far as the gut microbiome confirmed, until you come down the birth canal and you get some of mum's bacteria, which starts to colonate.
Mm-hmm.
Correct? Is colonate a word? Colonize. Mm-hmm. New word it is now. Starts to colonize, and then, like you just said, year by year, your diversity grows by your interactions with the environment, the foods that go in your mouth, the exposure to chemicals, and all the things that happen to us as we age. We get to a certain age where we have the highest amount of diversity in our gut microbiome, and then it starts to decrease, and that also is not good towards the aging process. So if we just do a few terms, because there's many microbiomes on and in the body.
That's right. Yeah.
We're predominantly going to talk about the gut microbiome, but there's the skin microbiome, there's the mouth microbiome, there's many microbiomes. Can you just quantify those for us? Share with them the ones that we're going to focus on, and then we'll get into the bacteria and everything from there.
So let's start with the definition of microbiome.
Go on.
So
mate,
I think the focus with the term microbiome for a lot of people specifies bacteria only, and that would be microbiota, or biota, depending on where you grew up. So microbiome is a collection of bacteria, viruses, and fungi, and the collection of these microorganisms in a particular region. So you've nailed it there. So you can have a microbiome obviously in the gut, but also on your skin, and the oral microbiome, which I'm sure you're across, is a huge new landscape of research. And obviously the urinary tract and the vaginal birth and the vaginal canal are also big ones as well. So there is fields of research in all of these different specific regions, and they're all breaking new ground, which is completely fascinating, really. And
then just one little interjection there, because now we're taking probiotics that are basically bits of dirt from healthy soil, because there's a microbiome, so to speak, in the earth. And as children, it'd be great if we had interactions with healthy earth. But sometimes, look at the face goes up. But that's another element of this. Like you just said, this is a vast conversation. As best as we can from your brain, if we can share what to do and what not to do in some way that's practical for us. But just to acknowledge that there are so many factors.
There are, and in the early 2000s, it cost around $1.5 million to map the genome. And the reason why I bring up that was because it seemed such a insurmountable task to try and do that for a really broad population. And I think
Watson and Crick, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And
good on you, boys. Shout out from Joint Dynamics.
Great memory too for you. And I think building on that now, we're in those early stages with the microbiome, in the sense that we're bringing together, the viruses, the fungal elements, and all of these things, not just the bacteria. And I think with bacteria and probiotics and things like that, this is where I think there's some fuzziness in the way it's communicated. So to your point around how do we look at it from a more practical standpoint, I've actually bought a present for you
I love
today.
this.
So to help people understand. But the first thing is to really preface this conversation with, unfortunately, we don't know all of it, and we don't understand the relationship between the microbiota, so the bacterial element of the microbiome, and then how that relates back to the virome and the fungal elements. Obviously, we have understanding. For example, we know that candida can suppress certain parts of your innate immune system and makes you more sensitive to food and things like that. So from a food sensitive point of view, so we do have
And just for a
understandings.
second, candida is quote unquote an overgrowth of bad bacteria. And I hesitate to use good and bad, but
it's an overgrowth of a yeast that should be there. So it's
got it. Thank you.
And I think it's actually a really good point. We're going to zigzag our way to your question, but the good and bad is done. Yeah. And really what we're looking for is what we call a kind of U-shaped curve in relation to how we visualize bacteria. So to answer your question about what are the more practical things to do, it's really about policing these kind of different microbes, whether they're more undesirable or not. And there's an example of this is kind of a bacteria du jour, if you like, over the last few years, called Akkermansia, which is popular amongst a lot of the functional medicine circles for its role in metabolic health. Now, in longevity, it's been shown, people, centurions, and all of these different types of kind of high performance health span people generally have high levels of Akkermansia because it has a quite pronounced role in metabolism. So if you have too little of it, there are preliminary studies suggesting that you're more at risk for obesity and some of these kind of things that are going to lead you down metabolic syndrome or a path that way. But then if you have too much of it, it can actually affect the barrier of your gut.
That's what I really love about this conversation right now, because like you said, the good and bad is gone. It depends on the colony.
Yeah,
your mates. So if you're a bacteria, the mates that you're hanging out with, and the ratios.
That's true. And I let me run this analogy in public for probably the first time. I've been using it in my clinic for years. Go. So this is a joint dynamics.
You heard it for the first time here.
I'll look right in the screen.
Go on, mate.
This is for you. So look, I've always kind of used an organized crime analogy for how to describe, especially the undesirable kind of bacteria. So generally, if you have, we'll take a Japanese organized crime syndicate, so the Yakuza, for example. If you have one member of the Yakuza, generally their ability to cause trouble is pretty low. If you have 10, then maybe they're going to start planning something. If you have 100, maybe the police need to know. If you have 1,000, then they're taking over your town. So this is where the word colonizing and colonies comes from, and it's a way to visualize how these overgrowths occur, because it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to go and kill every member of the Yakuza. It just means that we need to monitor and be aware of these levels so that we can get an understanding of the parameters at which they start to become troublesome. So really, when it comes to good and bad, it's actually not necessarily the presence of the species themselves or the presence of these potential criminals. It's actually more the parameters at which they're there. And in microbiome testing now, you'll find that largely the parameters are have a minimum where you have to actually be over that amount for it to be considered an issue. And in Europe now, as far as the WHO is concerned, even if you have PCR levels of Salmonella or Campylobacter, so these common pathogenic bacteria, they still recommend not to use antibiotics.
Which maybe highlights another point that keeps coming up, let's say in popular press commonly. When I take antibiotics, that does a great job of eliminating many types of bacteria. So antibiotics, I might take antibiotics for a bacterial infection, not a viral infection, for a bacterial infection. Just because, there's confusion there. And often, and I'm certainly not playing this role, but often you'll hear doctors will be scrutinised for giving antibiotics for viral infections. It seems though it's not as effective. But for bacterial infections, antibiotics are, mate, they're a bazooka. They're coming in, throwing lefts and rights and uppercuts in a very effective manner. And if there were Yakuza, I think they'd be cutting your finger off. Is that nothing against you guys? This is no attack on anyone from the accused. I love you, actually, respectfully. Sorry, a little sidetrack. But antibiotics and its role in treating a bacterial infection, but also its role in potentially increasing the likelihood. You mentioned SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Its role in potentially increasing the likelihood that I might get SIBO, which we've just connected to mental health, anxiety, depressive disorders. Can you just comment on that for a second?
Yeah. So I wrote
it's huge, isn't it? Like, there was a time when people said if you're taking antibiotics, you can't take probiotics because the antibiotic will kill. But now it seems as though we're saying if you are taking antibiotics, please take a probiotic, if not at the same time or as far away from taking that antibiotic in the same day as you can.
That's probably the first kind of swings and roundabouts with research around exactly what probiotics do. I think one of the key things around how antibiotics change things is that they reduce the diversity, and that's obviously, we've covered this a little bit already in the sense that reduced diversity has quite a long-term kind of chronic effect, and there are some studies, believe it or not, that suggest that probiotics aren't beneficial. I would still say that I'm kind of leaning towards definitely beneficial, mainly because of the suppression of these opportunistic kind of organized crime. So once a town becomes a little more vulnerable, it's easier for these types of kind of undesirables to come in and start exerting themselves, and this is where antibiotics tend to become a problem, because the characteristics of a probiotic, or one of them at which, is to have an antimicrobial effect against antigens and pathogens and things like that. So they play a role in bolstering the immune system along the lining of the gut in order to basically protect the gut and essentially, what we now know as possibly the rest of the body from the overgrowths of these bacteria. So when antibiotics come in, and look, I remember writing an article about this. The first thing about the article I wrote was that in the Second World War, people were dying needlessly, and antibiotics solved a massive problem and have since saved an inconceivable amount of lives. And I think it's really important to, once again, kind of transcend the good and bad element of this. And I think this is actually encouraging this, and please don't take this out of context, but some children have bacterial infections and they need antibiotics. And I think some people can be, we've just had a conversation about early life, and it can seem contradictory, but there are actually occasions where antibiotics will save your child. And so I think the next step to that, to talk about the more practical things, which I think we've always aligned on, is what do you do next? And probiotics or different categories of probiotics will offset some of the the diarrheal action or the side effects of antibiotics. So Saccharomyces boulardii has got great research now, I think even from Cochrane, which is a well-respected group, who have confirmed that you can take this category of probiotics and it will offset antibiotic-associated diarrhea symptoms, which is common in kids actually, and also for other people, but also you can have skin rash, hypersensitivity responses. So that category will help. Then you have your lactobacillus, the things that the species that we associate with commonly common probiotic formulas. They will also work to bolster that immune system and that gut lining and those kind of immune parts that will once again try and rebuild the digestive lining post the antibiotic use. It is a tidal wave. It's difficult because the tidal wave does work, but unfortunately the collateral damage we're finding is really, really scary. And there's actually now the WHO is really pushing antibiotic resistance as being probably one of the top 5 things to consider at the moment.
Which in itself is fascinating. Because a minute ago you said an overpopulation or an overgrowth of the undesirables, the bacteria, that if we get too much of them, in your analogy of the inverse U, start to create issues, health issues. it's interesting to think about that in the sense of how quickly a bacteria can also evolve. If you look at a human, it takes us, goodness knows, let's say, I'm going to average it out, 25 years to have our baby, whereas a bacteria is, quote unquote, giving birth, every couple of minutes. So the evolutionary process comparative to us is sped up. There's no way we can keep up, because now they are talking about antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria that, as they have babies, and it's the same survival of the fittest almost, to jump on Charles Darwin. The ones that survive are the ones that mutated, cell division, or the bacteria gave birth to another bacteria. Some of them are going to be wiped out, but as many, some of them, just like humans that evolved and flourished in certain environments due to some little genetic mutation that allowed them to thrive in said environment. It's exactly the same with bacteria, except the way that the speed at which they're evolving, like Charles, write that paper. I don't know what he's going to say there. Instead of being this long, it's just going to have to condense because it's so fast.
Exactly. And
it's fascinating to think of.
It really is. And you've really honed in on the evolutionary part of it as well. And I think a lot of these genetic mutations and some of this stuff obviously can be down to what would be considered to be an overuse of antibiotics, and but also some of these things actually just happen by accident. I think the one of the more to speak on probiotics in that point though, I don't think I've ever been quite freaked out as much, or astounded, let's be professional about it, by a study where in the US, I think they looked at around about 16 different probiotic formulas and kind of took them apart and saw what was in the capsule to assess whether or not the advertised species of on the label were actually present, and what numbers, what parameters, so it was a quality control thing. And for the results were really astounding in the sense that in some formulas you had nothing. In other formulas, you have presence of E. coli, but in other formulas, you actually have presence of bacteria that had antibiotic-resistant genes.
Jeez.
So this really speaks to quality control, and it really speaks to how things happen unintentionally, but by in some way there's the evolutionary zigzag, right, where something turns left in nature, and all of a sudden this starts to kind of breed itself into a generational issue that starts to spread across the globe. And
it's frustrating to hear that. Son of a gun.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is, and I think
puts the field back.
It doesn't.
I know. Okay.
No. You're right.
Give me 3 good brands to ease people that are using probiotics. Give me 3 good brands.
Yeah,
to ease my woes. I use probiotics. So my son is using probiotics.
Yeah, totally. And this is the thing. So look, I think for personally, I feel lucky because I think in Australia, where I say we, but the brands in Australia are regulated by the Therapeutics Goods Association. So if that were to happen, where they go in. I'm not sure if this is still common practice in Australia because I've been here for a while now, but there was a common practice when I used to work in the health food stores and things like that a member of the TJ or someone could walk in and basically randomly pull something off the shelf and test it. And in order to get an Austell number or a particular kind of standardized number, if you like, for that product, you had to prove to the TGA that the advertised amount of whatever said thing you're selling was actually for real, and that it was genuinely there and it would stay there. So, for example, with shelf-stable probiotics, the common practice used to be, and I think still is for the large amount of brands, that if you had a 30 billion strength capsule, they would make it at 40 and account for the degradation on the shelf, so that by the time it got to close to the use-by date, you would still have largely close to the advertised amount. But unfortunately, with some of the brands now in the States, and this is not all of them, but obviously because of the use of brands on iHerb and these kind of mass platforms, Amazon, you name it, there's less kind of FDA approved kind of brands out there. I would say that to not pick out particular brands, but to say that there are brands that do their own quality control and they will boast about it, because in the US they don't have to do it. So
Got it.
either you go for an Australian brand because they have to be Austell, they have to have that TGA kind of standard,
Yep.
or if you're going on a bigger platform such as the Amazons, iHerbs, and things like that, you're actually looking for companies that genuinely boast about their quality control. I'm just going to immediately contradict myself. So I've had some good experiences with Clear Labs in the States. They were classically
Clear Labs.
Yep.
That's the ones we sell at Joint Dynamics. We get from you guys. Thank you very much.
And I think they're probably more specifically probiotically oriented, and looking for companies aligned with them who have, as I said, they go through a really big and expensive quality control practice. So they have the right to boast about it, and you'll be able to read about that through their websites and things like
Brilliant. All right. Like you said, we zigzag our way. I want to get back to gut health and mental health. Just one point that I'd like to ask you to elaborate on a little bit more is that relationship between the gut and the brain. Now we call the gut the second brain. We say science is telling us that more serotonin is produced in your gut than actually in your brain, and then the brain needs serotonin in certain ways. The communication pathways, you mentioned the vagal tree. So there's the vagus nerve, which connects the brain to the gut, and it seems as though there's more communication pathways going from the gut to the brain there is from the brain to the gut, or is that just something that's been thrown out there? Can you talk about how we communicate, HPA axis, all this sort of stuff?
The easiest way to think about the gut-brain connection is actually just a freeway. Yeah. So there's lanes traveling in one direction and there's lanes traveling in another direction. So the idea is that the level of traffic is always pretty consistently bidirectional.
Okay.
So there won't be one or the other that's more or less, or at least from my knowledge, I'm sure there's researchers out there who might have a more precise understanding of that. But from my understanding, the traffic is constant and it's going each way at all times, and that's necessary because the vagal tree, or they call it the Great Wanderer, it really stimulates all of the visceral organs, and it helps the brain receive signals around the gut, but it also helps your heartbeat, and it has quite a big role to play in quite a lot of other different areas as well. So the interesting thing about how that relates back to the gut, and I'm going to give you your present in a second because it's probably appropriate. I wanted to wait because I'm sure our audience wonder what it is.
Building tension, release of tension. Perfect, mate. Like classical music.
But one of the byproducts of your fiber consumption is what we call short chain fatty acids, and they are literally just deconstructed carbohydrates or deconstructed fiber. And there's three main ones that help your probiotics to thrive. Now, the reason why I bring that up in relation to the vagal nerve is because even just now in clinical practices, I talk about terme du jour, but my category of prescription du jour, if you like, is prescribing these short chain fatty acids, and the butyrate, which is the primary short chain fatty acid that you get out of certain forms of fiber consumption, actually travels up the vagal tree to the brain. So to talk about the traffic, it's now that it's not just that it's the immune system involved or the messaging or the signaling system that we're talking about. We're now getting an understanding of what those the cars on the road are, and how that's all working. And to give you a sense of the butyrate element, there's some really interesting preliminary studies around butyrate, or as a prescription or as a short chain fatty acid. There's kind of different areas of research in giving people a high fiber diet, for example, or the bacteria that produce butyrate. So we can talk about that. But to bring the vagal nerve back, it's really now that we're seeing that even from a longevity point of view. So people have been on a good diet for a long time. So that Mediterranean, or we're both pretty aligned with the paleo way of doing things, whole foods, we'll keep it simple.
Yeah.
That high fiber diet where you're getting all of these bundles of nutrients wrapped up in insoluble and soluble fiber, that's now starting to show that the brain is in a good place and is resilient because of these things. And there was a great study quite recently where instead of looking at sick people, they decided to assess the gut and the brain environment of healthy people to start understanding what it should look like. So
brilliant.
they started to look at people who had high levels of resilience, and resilience is obviously a buzzword since since our little period of whatever that was, because I know we can't mention it on YouTube. But really we can, I guess, take back the term resilience now. Awesome. And think about it from a longevity standpoint, and this gut and brain connection is a huge part of that. And bringing in the diet and the immune system is a big part of it. But to the point you're making, the vagal tree is the road, that it's the freeway system that all of this occurs on. So anything that you can do to help that, or to fortify it, or to improve its integrity, signaling, whatever, is always going to have a huge result. And
part of that is something you just mentioned, the short chain fatty acids. One example you gave was butyrate, is by ingesting enough fiber. Is that correct? Ingesting
right.
Adequate fiber,
Yeah.
Let's just say from vegetables. Is that right?
Yeah.
Vegetables, which then will act as a prebiotic, is something that we call it now as well, don't we?
Yeah, it is.
A prebiotic to bolster the community of probiotics.
Exactly. And the idea is that, I prescribe these things in their isolated form because I'm looking for a therapy. So my context is a little different, but I'm lucky enough in that my work, I can prescribe a capsule of that, but also prescribe the diet as a long-term maintenance element, so that you don't need to take the capsules. So the capsules and the potions and things like that are a bridge to, giving you enough time to be able to sort the diet out and get that in place. But it really is just your fiber content is becoming, we've talked about this, I think, on the last podcast, but your fiber content is really just becoming the cornerstone of, quite a lot of different facets of not only health span, but, how your mental health is, executive function, for example, how you set goals, how you chunk those goals down, your ability to say yes and no. All of these different things are generally, now related to what could be considered to be, in simplicity, a whole food diet.
And then that gives more depth to the term, the second brain, with what you just said.
Yeah,
phenomenal.
I think I used to always think about the second brain a lot myself, and I found that, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say, because obviously we've had some great conversations over the years, and I'm now actually starting to think that it's not one or the other. There's no first and second. It is just a massive computing system now that is in tandem and almost now one entity. And I think my initial interest in the gut and the brain actually kind of grew out or bloomed from that, because obviously in natural medicine we've had a lot of success by treating the body as a system of systems that's conversing with each other, in ubiquitously. And so the fact that now we're able to really hone in on this communication and bring in the immune system in that sense, and then bring in your hormones and bring in appetite and metabolic conditions and all of these other things that by proxy are affected by this interaction, it's quite remarkable and exciting.
Yeah, the term that jumped to my mind there, and actually I'll use it in two contexts, was symbiosis or the symbiotic relationship. Perfect, and then we can use that with the gut and brain. But then also what I find fascinating in this term, in this field of the microbiome is, sorry, excuse me for a second, but sometimes you read or you hear about there's more bacteria than there are human cells. And sometimes you hear the ratio of 1 to 10, and then other times you go, hang on, settle down. It's probably 1 to 1. But it seems as though we are a host for, excuse my French, a shitload of microbes and bacteria that don't have human DNA, that have their own stuff going on. And we work in a symbiotic relationship, whether it's 1-to-1 or 1-to-10, I don't think it's important, but go back to the comment on a lot, to be more proper termed. There's a massive relationship between us, and we're a host for many forms of bacteria that work in symbiosis that are good for us, that help us produce butyrate, that help us produce B vitamins, for example, which help us have good energy and good for the brain and the way that we convert energy from food to usable energy in the body. So that term, when you asked me to think about it, what jumped in me was symbiosis, the symbiotic relationship between the gut and the brain, because if you remove one, then we're not going to do so well for very long. But then also back to the main topic that we're talking about, there's this fascinating symbiotic relationship with us being a host for a lot of other microbes, bacteria, organisms that help us.
Yeah, I think the symbiosis is lovely. I've always been interested in the micro and macro kind of cosm examples. I think probably from my old hippie days,
I had my hippie days as well, mate.
Come
Shout
on.
out to the hippie days.
If you're young, don't worry about it. Read a book.
Get in there for a little bit. Read Henry David Thoreau on Walden Pond.
Yep.
There you go.
Go there.
Explore
it's okay.
that.
It's going to be safe. But there are some people that really have drawn, the earth and the planet as, and drawn connections with our body and how it works, and I think, as humans and dogs and cats, we all rely on the earth itself to provide us with resources to thrive. And life itself is, foundationally, driven by that. And I think your comments around symbiosis and all of these different elements of host, you could think of the earth as our host in that sense. And
I love that.
you can draw quite a lot of different, different kind of dots, if you like, and, hot spots in the earth where you probably don't want to go or that need to be helped, or colonies of places that you do and don't want to go. But the primary thing that I wanted to bring up around that is that the earth itself, I always think of the film Interstellar. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah. Matthew McConaughey.
The reconnaissance. Yeah. So that film always makes me wonder, around just exactly what would happen if the worst hit, in the sense that the only option that we would have would be to leave the earth. And because we can't grow food, the earth can no longer provide the resources that we need to thrive. And your point around the body and the resources it needs to thrive is that the diet that we have, and these things like fiber and the fruits and vegetables that we eat and all of these things, the bacteria in our bodies, and I'm not going to comment on the ratios, but the bacteria in our bodies, they need this infrastructure to thrive. They need the earth and they need us to make the decisions. They need the rhythmic choices that we make to really help them thrive, so that they can then kind of fulfill their potential of what they contribute back. So I think that with technology and some of the breakthroughs that we've got, with machine learning and things like that, I'm extremely excited to understand how that's going to help our understanding of the kind of minutiae of these smaller populations and how they live within the host. And I always use Hong Kong as a bit of an example, that when people come here, they love the infrastructure. They're like, everything works. In Melbourne, you used to have to wait 15 minutes for a train, and
I stopped taking my book. When you go somewhere and think, it's going to take, like Australia. I'm going to take it because I want to read this book. And then I'd go to get my Hong Kong ID or something, and I'd sit down and I'd be a page in. I'm like, oh, come on, man. Yeah. Whereas in Australia,
it's just easy.
You're halfway through your second chapter.
And it's, there's a common comment here, a usual comment. They're like, I came for a year and I stayed for 10, and I think one of the things around that, maybe for a lot of people, and I've often thought about it, is that the infrastructure it makes life more comfortable. And I think the more that we can draw that as an analogy to the way our bodies host these bacteria and host these populations, the better that we can make our cells, or the environment of our guts, and and also dietary choices, the better they're going to thrive, and they're probably more likely to stay.
Yeah. All right. We got in the weeds a little bit for stuff that is directly related to the topic. It's almost as if we've laid a really broad foundation. Now, bringing it towards the top of our pyramid or our triangle, let's really dive into specifically on gut health and its relationship to mental health.
Yeah. So one of the things you touched on a little bit earlier is serotonin, and I think it's been pretty well expressed now, but 90% of your serotonin is created in your stomach, and the idea is that, or at least around the upper abdomen, and that serotonin is then transported to the brain, and that in itself is remarkable. And so once again, this is another example of something I mentioned earlier, where the connection's always been there. We've always been cognizant of that connection, but now we're defining it better. So the other big thing that I think surprises a lot of people is that the probiotics, so your lactobacillus species and bifidobacterium species that you'll see commonly in probiotic formulas, the right probiotic formulas. Don't buy the E. coli ones.
To the Aussie ones.
They will also create neurotransmitters as well. So there's a selection of lactobacillus species, for example, that create the inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA, which is not a Dutch music style. It is, but not this one. And GABA basically is the relaxing brain chemical that takes, kind of shepherds serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine, so all the excitatory neurotransmitters, and it kind of helps you calm down when the time's right.
Gives you a little bit of a hug, doesn't it?
That's okay. Right? It's just like, hey, it's time for quiet time, peace and quiet.
It's the hippie. Because I wanted to hug you when you had that conversation before. I was playing the role. Philip was playing the role of GABA. I was just like, I feel centered and calm. Thank you. Philip GABA Watkins, everyone.
Look, not the music style, but no,
sorry,
it used to be. No, my late 20s used to be. But the idea now is that these probiotics can actually have an effect on your brain chemicals, and not so much that they're going to change them drastically, such as a medication or something like that. But over time, there are now meta-analyses and systematic reviews that have confirmed that we're at the point where we have patented probiotic species that will assist with mood and rumination. So rumination is thinking about the past. So they're now very much defining the therapeutic role for probiotics and how they can help you with the different brain chemicals that are affecting some of these conditions, such as common conditions such as mood and
give us a rough time frame. So when you said don't just take them for a day, don't just take them for a week.
Yeah,
maybe get about 3 to 6 months.
Extremely important question.
Give us a time frame that you would be happy to share.
I would say that the minimum, I can give a minimum. So some of the studies I've read, the early ones were 12 weeks, so 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I think you're looking at 6.
Yeah.
And my understanding also is, I guess 2 comments would be that the diet is a big part of that, and I don't know if that's been adequately controlled in the studies. So, for example, if you haven't quite got the understanding that diet, a whole food or whatever it is for you, diet can help you with these symptoms, how does the probiotic affect, what's the outcome effect on that? Do all of this, people in this study have a great diet and the probiotics have just, so as this, I only say that because it's, important to take these studies with an understanding that, it isn't just very binary. This is where I think for a lot of people, the supplements are a bridge to, if someone is, for example, they're experiencing depressive symptoms, going up to them and just saying, hey, and this is where I guess I learned this in my early days in the psychiatric center, that you can't just go up to someone and say, I think a whole food diet's going to be really good for you, start tomorrow. That's just the worst thing.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's just
Yeah, so
personal.
what? Drastic
Personally,
upheaval from where I am to
right. It's like, I
persuasion
never,
over time is the term I
never.
think I've heard you use.
Yes, thank you. It is natural medicine is a persuasion, and this is where the probiotics are going to slowly change because it's largely because the immune system is potentially part of the issue, and I touched on earlier the glial system and the interior immune system in the brain, and part of that in early development. But what can happen is that you can have bacterial infections, or a really bad virus that flew around a while back that crossed the blood-brain barrier, and that can turn on the glial system. And what we need to know about that in simple terms is that when they're not bothered, so I always like to think of Lord of the Rings, you got the little Shire where you got all these people just living their lives, happy, doing what they do, they clean up the place, they live symbiotically with each other, and your glial system in your brain does that. It cleans your brain, keeps everything balanced.
Particularly while you're sleeping.
Yep, great point, deep sleep. And so it does this, that's its job. And that's from early development, it really does clean the brain and keep it all balanced. When there is what we call a glial insult, so an infection or, dare I say, some kind of trauma or something along those lines, that glial system actually changes its structure and loses its impulse to clean and balance. So what can happen is that you actually then have in younger people or in adults, you can have an immature glial system, or you can have what's called a glial activation, which is part of what we call neuroinflammation. Now, to get back to the brain and the gut, the acetate, which is another form of short-chain fatty acid, is been seen to restore that glial system so that it can then potentially go back to cleaning the Shire and getting back to these natural balanced impulses that it has to look after the brain, as opposed to be ready for a fight constantly. And the reason why I've kind of zigzagged my way there, again, this has been a big thing for us, but the reason why that's important is because we understand that probiotics in combination with these short-chain fatty acids have the potential to help that. So to improve that interior immune system and improve that neuroinflammatory picture as well. And that's where there's we'll see. Basically.
Keeping the Yakuza out of the Shire is what we're doing. But just so I can,
I'm glad you bring it up, because it just helps me. These are all the things that have helped.
That's the next movie. My
the things that have helped me understand this over the years. So yeah.
Just to close that door of something that I was just thinking about. So good practice, maybe not best practice, but a good practice that you can take away from this conversation is, if you are going to take probiotics for a reason, take them for at least 3 to 6 months. And do you say that you should take probiotics with food, which is a form of prebiotics, same time or separate? What are you doing?
Thank you for
ideally
that's been a subject of conjecture for a very, very long time, and I think
we're going to shut that down right now, man.
Please, let's shut it down.
One old hippie to another one.
Let's shut it down. So having probiotics after food is the recommendation. As I said, I think, sometimes someone's going to work out a reason why that's not the case. But basically the understanding is that when you eat, you're somewhat diluting your stomach acid. And if you are trying to get the little hobbits through Mordor and they're, because they're live, right? They're alive. So you're trying to get them through the volcano.
Got it.
Your stomach acid is meant to block things.
Oh, this is a beautiful analogy.
If you're trying to, you can see where, because my poor old patients just get these long emails.
Hang on, are we talking about probiotics?
No, we're
literally the movie.
So the idea is you've got live organisms, right? Yeah. And your stomach and the acid in your stomach is there to stop them from coming in. So really the time where the stomach is more vulnerable to these live organisms actually passing through is after food. And this has actually been the birth of things like spore-based probiotics that are dormant in a capsule and then thrive after they've passed through the stomach. And they're another category of probiotics that have helped in particular conditions like IBSD and things like that. So they were born out of, once again, some studies that were suggesting that your stock standard probiotic formulas weren't actually getting through the stomach, or if they were, they were, pretty low ratios of what you thought was in the capsule. Probably, I don't want to misquote, but looking at 10 to 20%.
Well, there you go. We're going to have a recommendation. We're going to go out on a limb and say, people, when you take your probiotics for 3 to 6 months, the Australian ones, all Clear Labs, we're just going to put it all together. Best practice that we're going to say right here, right now, is eat them after food.
That's generally right.
Makes, I think, common sense as well. That get in there, they get hold of the prebiotics as well while they're there, and
exactly.
they haven't passed through the gut. They can catch hold of them.
And this is a.
Oh, here comes the present. Geez, we've been holding on to this.
I think so. Why just do it all at the start? Have to have a reason. So if you followed our show, our last episodes.
Oh, yeah, I remember when I said avocado was a great source of fiber, and you gave me that look.
I had a really lovely conversation with you last time, and I felt really bad because I was on a lentil trip, and I was just like, you know what, I've been, we bonded originally when we first met around paleo and things like that. So, for the audience, I've been grain free and legume free for a fairly long time, unless I'm having an off day. And when you mentioned avocado, I was like, you know what? I would say avocado is just a little lower in the fiber content. And, and I walked out of there and I'm like, you know what? I've misrepresented avocado. And today he's here to say, you know what? We're friends again.
Not only a great source of fats, but also a great source of fiber.
It's an amazing source of fats. It's an amazing source of pretty much everything you would need to turn on your brain. And I thought it's our first video, we'd have a little mascot for today.
We got a mascot.
So hopefully in the other ones you now have a little mascot, so people can think about the importance.
Wilson, is that all right if next time I come back I bring the avocado? Beautiful. And we'll name him along the way. But all right, mate. Thank you for the gift. Much appreciated.
It's my pleasure.
The depth behind it from that last conversation. Go to whatever episode where Philip and I talk about fiber.
Indeed.
Back to the mental health element, relationship to the gut. That was actually a pretty practical element of this conversation, when to take probiotics and the length of time. We've given some great information, I believe, on where to source your probiotics, given some great information on the role of the whole food diet in relationship to having a beneficial U-shaped curve. Get the Yakuza down and bring the Shire up. Imagine that war, going to battle. Unbelievable. Take us to the next step, mate. Where are we going now?
So we've talked a lot about longevity and and health span and things like that. So I wanted to touch on that a little bit because I think one of the other bigger landscapes of the gut and brain connection has been through neurodegenerative diseases. And we've touched on that neuroinflammatory element already. And I think that was brilliant, that bit on the glial cells. Rewind and listen to that again, guys. It is important, and it's a really I think we'll start to find that it might actually become a more prominent area of research in the degenerative element. And I think one of the more alarming statements that flies around social media from practitioners and things like that is that Alzheimer's starts at 40, and it does, and so that's one thing. But I think the understanding is that the level of glial activation and the way that butyrate specifically as a source of a short-chain fatty acid from fiber, so it actually manages that risk, and it manages right. And this is
I'm pointing to the avocado again. People, make it your friend.
There's method behind my madness.
Yeah, I love it.
But the idea is that also it's not just Alzheimer's. It's also you can look at the gut and the brain with cardiovascular disease as well. And I think one of the key things that I've, brings out the diet. And, one of the things I always get from our conversations, I was thinking about it last time and it's happening again. Everything we talk about is just, hey, if your plate looks like a rainbow, you're on the right track. So I'm going to
Thank you for saying that.
You know what?
Simplifying, yeah.
Job done.
We want adequate diversity is an essential tenet of biology, isn't it?
We
really want adequate diversity of the gut microbiome. To achieve that, you want adequate diversity of the whole foods that you eat.
Precisely. Yeah. And so that's a simplified way of really getting to this. But I guess to understand some of the science as to why, in cardiovascular disease, one of the big kind of back and forths has been around TMAO, and which is a byproduct of red meat and animal fats. And what basically happens is that the eggs, meat, and these things have an interaction with the gut, and for some people genetically, you have this TMAO byproduct created, and that then is been confirmed as a risk for cardiovascular disease. So the first thing is you can test for that. So that's cool because look,
genetic test, DNA.
You can have a blood test to see how much
Okay.
serum TMAO you have.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that, with things like carnivore and things like that, and the more extreme elements, like this is where, I think if you were considering doing a diet like that, you want to check your TMAO levels, because one of the things that vegetables do, or colorful fruits and vegetables, so let's think of your more purple fruits and vegetables, so eggplant, blueberries, and things like that, those darker pigmented fruits and vegetables, though the compound that makes them that deeper purple are polyphenols. And what they found is that the polyphenol content of your food, so what's on the rest of the plate, actually offsets that TMAO level.
Nice.
So this is where, when you're reading an article saying red meat, eggs, or will stimulate TMAO, it'll give you atherosclerotic vascular risk and things like that, which is true. It doesn't
in a
necessarily.
certain cohort.
Well, this is the thing, yeah. So it's alarming. You're like, oh, maybe I should be this or that, but really, it's actually you can mitigate these things via using things like fruits and vegetables and stuff like that in order to manage that. And the reason why I bring that up in relation to the gut and the brain is because you're not only offsetting those risks from a metabolic syndrome and cardiovascular level, but you're also then unwittingly or unintentionally, or by bonus if you wish, unlocking that gut-brain vagal connection at the same time and getting more oxygen to your brain, which is a big risk for neurodegenerative diseases as well. And once again, the way the diet works with the immune system and interacts with the gut and the brain has all of these other kind of longevity elements where you may not die early.
Yeah, to put it bluntly. And actually, I love that. Science is the ivory tower, and we need science. And sometimes that's the key that unlocks the motivation for human behavioral change. Oh, I didn't understand the science behind having enough fiber so I can create butyrate and acetate, which is good for my brain in the way that the brain washes itself when I sleep. Holy cow, I am going to make sure I get adequate vegetables in. Or I've heard of this, that the dangers with red meat and eggs, and I honestly get frustrated by that, which is just, I'm not saying it's positive, but I get frustrated by that. But in a certain cohort, yes, absolutely. But do you know what? If you feel that you might be vulnerable to that, or you don't want to fall into that risk category, just make sure you eat enough vegetables, and there'll be, again, the benefit of the short-chain fatty acids via the fiber, the benefit of the brain, like all these things carry over. But where the rubber hits the road is back to our point on diversity. Just make sure you get enough fruits and vegetables, eat the rainbow, which is brilliant. Like we could have done 2 podcasts, people. The first one says, "Hi, Andrew. Hi, Phil. Eat your fruit and vegetables, everyone, and then eat healthy meats. See ya."
Here's an avocado.
Enjoy. Or we can give you the background so you can dive in, but ultimately the result needs to be the same. Whether it takes you an hour and a half to get the motivation and the rationale for human behavioral change if you're not already, or to strengthen your resolve to add another serving of vegetables into your day. Either way, it works out, doesn't it?
It does, and I'll expand on that even from a clinical practice point of view, where one of the things, depending on the microbiome results that I see with people, I actually literally had someone about 4 weeks ago who I didn't prescribe anything else aside from this. There's one of the people I'm studying with created something that they called the microbiome mashup, and the idea is that you basically go and buy pretty much around about 12 to 15 different vegetables, chop them all up, or if you're affluent enough to have a Vitamix, you just kind of pulse them up a little bit, and then put them all into a box. Or some people like to put them as, turn them into ice cubes or something like that. And then with every meal, you take out a small portion of this microbiome mashup and you add it to your smoothies, your soups, and your stir fries or things like that to literally bolster the diversity of plant fibers that you're getting in your meals.
Can I add another thing that we do at the Cox household?
Go.
So just say 2 nights ago, Sunday night, my wife, or Sunday afternoon, we made a bone broth. So we chicken, and we had the chicken, the big pot full of water, a bit of apple cider vinegar, onions, garlic, celery, carrots, and there was about 5 different vegetables. After about 4 to 6 to 8 hours, depending on the day, but we make the broth, and then we strain the broth, put it in those containers. It cools down. We put it in the freezer, take 1 out a day. But there's all these vegetables left over. So what I do with those vegetables, I put them in one of those big steel pots. I add olive oil, and I add a heap of linseeds, chia seeds, sometimes black sesame seeds, mash it all together. I might add, any other leftover vegetables in the fridge, and mash it all up, and then I put it in our dehydrator, and I make these fiber crisps. Back to the avocado, this is full circle. Whenever we make guacamole, they are the best things. But I will take them to work with me every day and just have 3 of those crackers, because I make we have 9 shelves in our dehydrator. But just say I'll have enough to make maybe 3 or 4. Cut them up, and then it's another way just to easily get the. Do you call it the microbiome mashup? What do you call it?
Yeah, the microbiome mashup.
Yeah. So it's another way, because again, we haven't even touched on seeds and herbs and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
But there's another way that
there is, and herbs and spices are a great source of polyphenols as well. And
coffee as well, mate. If you get enough sleep.
Oh, that's been debunked too.
Oh, really? What if you?
Yeah.
Whoa, I'm hesitant here, mate.
No,
cover your ears. Cover your ears, my friend.
I know. I feel like I'm going to bring a coffee bean to our next.
Do it. Throw it in.
I'm not. So
succinctly as possible.
So, okay. Well, all right. That's a challenge. Coffee may extend your life.
Get out of here. Yeah. Sorry. I don't dispute that. It was in the Journal of Alzheimer's. There's a mention on coffee, caffeine. But what perked my ears and the ears of the avocado was that whenever I'm discussing the role of a health coach with clients or people, I'll say coffee is your friend, caffeine, as long as you're getting enough recovery and sleep. If you're not, then I just say it's like a high interest loan.
Yeah, that's
There's
true.
a Yakuza dude stand behind you doing this, or those guys, it seems like they use those knuckle busters. Holy cow. It's a high interest loan that if you rely on coffee, caffeine as a stimulant because I don't get enough sleep to get through the day, then maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, that guy's going to call up and say, hey.
100%.
And the interest repayment is in the form of ill health.
That's
adrenal fatigue, whatever it is that you want to call it.
That's the U shape that we were talking about before, right? The Goldilocks zone. And, coffee has the polyphenols in it as well. And the one thing though, I think that I got from the fiber crisps that you're making is that you're describing a very sovereign process where you're in charge. And I think this is one of the other elements of the way things are moving in this landscape, especially when it comes down to trying to unlock the gut brain bit that we've been talking about today, or just metabolic health in general, or whether it be genetics, sirtuins, all of these different types of things when it comes to a healthy life. There has to be a level of sovereignty. And I think there's an interesting dissonance around that sovereignty that has to be explored in some senses, because people like to act as if they want to be in control, such as making that huge effort to make those really great, nutritious crisps and, taking it that extra mile, or being spoon-fed, a pill or a potion or whatever it is. And I think it's going to be a very interesting there's going to be a lot to see on how that's going to unfold for the general public, because all of what we've talked about today does actually require quite a lot of sovereignty.
Yeah.
And it does require a lot of effort. And I think we could both attest to the fact that anyone that we've seen in our professional lives or even personal lives who have been able to, in some cases, either reclaim that sovereignty if they've, I've had had a few years where I just stopped training, I was getting bored, and I reclaimed it now, or claim it for the first time. You know, they're going to get great results. But I think also the understanding is that there may be that you may need to actually take small steps and really, take your time with this, with the understanding that it will work out. But as I said, I guess my point is more around of a general observation as to where this is going to go and
Yeah.
what the direction is. Because if Alzheimer's is diabetes type 3, which, I mean, gosh, it's looking that way, right? Then how do we, as people in healthcare, how do we, help the person that likes sovereignty and understands that they need to do something, but where do we come in? And this is where maybe counselors or, we need to bring in more people, as many as possible, really, to try and assess and help where, we might not be able to.
Yeah, and make those small steps seem achievable.
And it doesn't, it may not seem as, as cool as David Goggins doing 1,200 chins or whatever it is. I think we all get seduced by these amazing
Extreme.
feats of strength and amazing feats of discipline. And, I'm a Jocko fan. I want to do everything all the time and all this stuff. But I think if this is a message to someone who's like, my mood isn't as good as I'd like it to be, then maybe start off with doing something that actually involves you not trying something but taking something out. Maybe understanding that, to your point around the coffee, your sleep, if your sleep is getting affected because you're having a coffee a bit late at night, then you can still have 8 coffees. Just do it before 12. You don't have to necessarily even change the amount. And obviously, that was a really big exaggeration. Please don't have 8 coffees before 12 p.m.
But we were talking about David Goggins, and that's quite extreme. So
David Goggins.
First on to, not
David
saying
Goggins
David Goggins has 8 coffees, but you were being extreme in the sense of 8 coffees.
An
If you have an 8.
Yeah. He has IV energy. But I
You
think
3 coffees.
Yeah, I think sometimes it can just be as simple as sitting down and saying, can I change the timing? Can I change the frequency? Can I do something a little bit just to make a little bit of change? And in some cases, that may be the momentum that you need to do something else.
And yeah, even to utter to yourself, I got this a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I've heard the saying, aim low enough. You know what I mean? So sometimes aim high enough, aim for the stars, shoot for the moon shots.
Jordan Peterson, right?
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
Because it makes change is difficult. We are habitual sons of bitches, you would say. We're a ball of habits, and changing that when you get to a certain age seems like it's quite difficult. But as far as the brain health is concerned, bringing in new things, adequate diversity of we spoke about this, gut health for the microbiome, adequate diversity there, adequate diversity of the foods that we eat, adequate diversity of movement as well, movements and thoughts is also really important for our overall health in the context. And sometimes to make that achievable, to leverage on Jordan Peterson, thank you, it was Jordan Peterson, we just have to aim low enough so we can say, I got this. And you know what? Another thing that seems to resonate with me when I'm trying my best to help the people that I have the fortune to work with is to say you're worth it. You're worth it. Aim low enough so you just get that feeling that I got this today. And if I can string a few wins together, these small wins together, then you know what? That's what seems almost, menial, such a small thing leads to a big thing with time. Consistency is the number one driver of change. Aim low enough so it's achievable. I got this. You're worth it. Over to you.
I think you nailed it. But also, one of the things, as I said, I think that I found in looking at a lot of, especially from a mental health side of things, is that there's so much pressure to do everything all at once.
Yeah.
And I think the difficulty with that is that whilst some people pull it off and, they have amazing stories that unfold from that, I would suggest that largely most people don't experience it that way.
Yeah.
And if, for everything that we've talked about today, from, treating potential mood disorders to, looking at all of these different things and how the research is going to unfold and how to do that. I mean, as I said, we still don't necessarily know exactly what that's going to look like, but the idea is that you do have this sovereignty there if you want it.
Yeah.
And it doesn't though have to be something that is you're going to get on social media about. It can actually be, like you said, something really small that is just making your bed, to speak on Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
And it can be something that proves to the world that you have a level of sovereignty and that you are in charge of something. And that charge can then lead you to want to do whatever you need to do. But the premise behind the success of working on the gut-brain interaction is that it takes a long time. And something else I wanted to bring up is that it may not necessarily need to be diet. Now, I'll trust that you're going to tell me to shut up and,
Well,
the
I
time
thought we were
comes.
coming to an end, but no, throw it out there.
I'm really
let's
sorry,
go, and then
but
we'll
I
wind it
remember
down
we
there.
talked about it. But
Because that just piqued my interest. We don't want to miss out on this.
Wilson's going to come put some tape on my face. No,
The next person
in a nice, gentle fashion.
Monday Studios, the next client's knocking at the door. Just give us 5 minutes.
So I wanted to actually touch on gut-associated hypnotherapy, and
Nice.
Originally the FODMAP diet that people use for irritable bowel syndrome.
That's a challenge.
This is why I brought this up, because I think we just, through that conversation that we had, I just this is another example of the fact that it may not necessarily be what you think it is. And the Monash Medicine in Melbourne, they were the leaders in the fructose FODMAP diets for IBS, and I think they've gotten to the point now where 70% of people with IBS symptoms improve on 4 to 6 weeks of low fructose. So look, it's there.
Yeah. I'm not disputing
No. I'm saying no, but it's but the idea is that it is extremely hard. Now, what they've done is that they've worked with some therapists in the US, and they've created an app that you can use, which is a 12-week program that is gut-associated hypnotherapy, so 10 minutes a day. And the study that they've just released recently, I think over the last year or so, may even be a bit longer, so if you go out there and quote me, that's fine. But after 6 weeks, the app that they had, these hypnotherapy techniques, had almost the exact same efficacy as low FODMAP after 6 weeks.
Really?
And so
10 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Just pressing play on my phone, sitting there
Exactly.
and listening to it, or laying down.
Exactly. So this is to our point around sovereignty and finding your place in where you need, what's going to work for you. Even just sticking your headphones in and listening to this for 10 to 15 minutes a day, if you can just, I love that your point about consistency. If you can just do that and that's it, then largely you're going to find that, you should expect some good results there. And, meditation, I would say if you haven't tried it, try it. It will change your brain literally. And that's also, I think, around about 10 minutes a day for 8 weeks will change the amygdala there in your brain, and that primes you for stress. So
the sentinel that's looking out.
Right. And it's telling you whether you care about something or you don't. So to maybe, wind that up, then you have the sovereignty, but it may not necessarily be where you think it is. There are options for you that are achievable and that you can look at that will work on all of the things that we've looked at today, if the diet is the next step for you.
If I picked up my phone right now, where would you suggest I go to get access to either of those two, the meditation or the one where they did the
So
hypnotherapy?
the Nerva is the app. It's
Nerva.
Nerva, and I'll converse with them and see if I can get our listeners a discount code.
Oh, you're a good person, Philip Watkins.
Personally, I use for meditation, I use Waking Up, which is they have a 28-day introductory course where they introduce you to multiple different forms of meditation. So once again, this is about finding what's for you.
And even simpler than that, sometimes I just go to YouTube. 10-minute meditation on
point.
YouTube.
Exactly.
Seriously. Or 10-minute breathing practice on YouTube.
And if you can commit to something and do it once again with a level of consistency for 10 minutes, you know, always there was quite an old famous hip hop figure that said if you can't meditate for 10 minutes, you probably need 3 hours. And you know, like, you know, so once again, you know, these
you can't afford not to do it.
The Waking Up app is, as I said, is a really good introduction if you've never done meditation or mindfulness, because the sessions are literally just spanning Zen Buddhism to Taoism to all of these different kind of areas, and you should find one particular technique that works for you.
Adequate diversity there as well, mate. What we're going to do is wind this conversation up. Give me, as succinctly as possible, 3, when you review this conversation in your mind right now, give me the 3 biggest points of action that you'd just like to either repeat or reiterate to these people. Oh, building of tension again.
Just thinking it through. I think don't underestimate the power of your diet, but also understand that your body is specifically in the gut and brain connection. Your body really is a system of different systems talking at a dinner table all the time. And sometimes when you're experiencing symptoms, it may not seem like they make any sense. And the reason why they may not seem like they make any sense is because they're all talking at the same time. So get some help.
Yeah, lovely.
Reach out to someone who can at least get you started to building on that. Fiber is extremely important. That's the second thing. And you know, I think we all, we all want to look good in a t-shirt, and you've already achieved that. I'm on my way.
You're a good person, Philip.
I'm on my way. So you know, carbohydrates tend to be the thing that we think about the less. But really, if you're looking at longevity but also just even, you know, trying to move the scale on some of the things that we've talked about today, especially getting the best out of your probiotics, for example, it's going to be the big focus for you, and aiming for around about 20 to 30 grams a day is going to be a good starting point for you.
How much one avocado, roughly? Enough.
Enough. Oh, I knew you were going to ask that question. It's my fault for bringing in an avocado. The third thing is that we're not there yet, and if you find this stuff interesting, keep listening to podcasts like this, and come in with an open mind that the simple things that you do are really where all this science comes from. You know, all of the cool things that you do with your diet and even, you know, some of the broader things we've talked about, that inspires the science that people value so much on YouTube and all of these things, that it's only because there are so many success stories from people who, you know, eat the blueberries or do these types of things that inspire the researchers to go, maybe there's something there. So maybe you could be one of those people that goes inspires the researchers through what you do on a daily basis.
100%. And if you lose it one day, don't worry about it. Just get back to it the next day.
Yep.
Because you're worth it, and you got this from Philip and I. All right. Thank you for hanging out with Philip and I. That was a long, winding conversation. Always so much fun. My brain is actually spinning as I try to make sense of it all and put in the right context and the right order. But that's why I'll go and listen to this podcast again, which is great. Hey guys, do me a massive favor. Hit subscribe or share this with your friends. That was incredibly valuable. The information that Phil just passionately shared with us, he does a lot of research in this area, so that's valid for you to take note of and share with your friends. We really appreciate it. Really appreciate hanging out with you again, mate.
Thanks for having me.
To another one. And thanks again for hanging out with me here at the Joint Dynamics podcast. Thanks again to Monday Studios here for giving us this great venue. And big thanks to you for hanging out with us. And I'll see you again in 2 weeks. See you, Phil.
Yep. Thanks again.
Bye, guys.
See you later.